Mental Health First Aid. My name is Denise Ellsbury. This month, we're joined by Linda Pacha. So I met Linda at a Send Silence Packing event. It was a suicide prevention event at North Central College several months ago. And Linda lost her college-age son, Nick, to suicide. And now she has a real passion for helping people understand mental health issues and for suicide prevention. So I really wanted her to come on Mental Health First Aid today to tell us about Nick and about what we need to know about suicide prevention. So Linda, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate you being here.
You're welcome. Thank you for inviting me. It's a really important topic, and I'm so happy to be part of this.
Well, thank you. So tell us about Nick and your family.
Well, I grew up in a suburb of Chicago, and my husband grew up in Kansas. We met in 1990, and we got married in 92, moved to Naperville then. We had our son, Nick of Nick's Network of Hope in 1994. Then we had our daughter in 1996. They were 2 years apart and best friends. And we lived in a quiet subdivision. There was a road that came off of the major street of Napier Boulevard, and it wound around the subdivision and then made like a big half circle and then went back out again. And our house was located in the back of a circle. So it was really quiet where the kids grew up. There weren't a lot of kids, but it was, and there weren't many cars that would go back and forth, but it was just a really pleasant area to, for the kids to grow up. In the backyard, they had a sandbox, swing set, a little Tykes swimming pool. They would ride their bikes out in front. I had a front porch that I would sit there, or my husband would sit there, and we would watch the kids ride back and forth or take their little Tykes bike or little Tykes pickup truck and go back and forth. So that's how they spent the real young years. They were also in all kinds of Park District classes through Naperville. All the Mommy and Me classes, music classes, you name it, they were a part of it. They went through public school for grade school and for middle school. And for high school, they went to a private Catholic school in Lisle. We also liked to, go on trips together. We were big on family time, so we took trips to the North Woods. We went fishing. We'd rent a pontoon boat and a cabin, and we would fish. We took cruises to the Caribbean and to Alaska. We just valued our family time together. Very close-knit family.
So it was kind of that, what seemed like a really perfect and wonderful environment.
Absolutely.
And trying to do everything you could for your kids and for your family.
Very much so. Very much so.
So tell us about Nick.
Well, Nick, being his mom, of course, I'm a little prejudiced, but I mean, you ask anybody.
You're entitled.
He was one of the kindest, sweetest, gentle souls, kindest person I've ever met to date, and my husband says the same thing. When he was growing up, he had these passions and intensities for things from the time he was really small. The first thing was cars and trucks. He had this rug that we had downstairs, and it had a townscape on it. And he would spend time on his belly with his feet kicked up behind him, and he would place his Hot Wheels cars and trucks, he'd park them, and he would spend hours using his imagination that way. And from cars and trucks, the intensity went then for planes. He just had such a passion. He knew all the fleets of Airbus, Boeing, McDonnell Douglas. And I'm talking, he was young, maybe even before kindergarten, he was starting already to love the planes. I have a friend who is an airline pilot, and this is pre 9/11. He gave him a schedule for all the flights, and they were going in and out of O'Hare, and gave him a map of the runways. So Nick had not a perfectly photographic memory, but a somewhat photographic memory. He memorized all that. And he's knee high, and he's he would talk to the neighbors and say, look up there, see that plane? that's a Boeing 727. And it's 10:30, it's heading to Florida, and it came from runway D. So, you know, parents, adults loved that because it was so unique to see a kid that had such passion at such a young age.
Right.
For kids his own age, you know, it was not so much because Nick was known as the kid who liked planes, and they couldn't really relate to that. You know, from the airplanes, then it went to cityscapes, to buildings, to skyscrapers, and so I'd go to parent-teacher conferences, and you know, right as soon as the very beginning of the parent-teacher conference, the teacher would say, "Oh, you have such a nice boy, and let me show you these papers. Look at the Boeing plane that he drew here, or here's a picture of a map, a very detailed picture of the United States." And so it was always, you know, very. They always pointed to his passions. But like I said, the adults embraced that and thought that was so unique. But other kids, I think, had a little hard time relating to him. And that's, you know, that just was the way that was.
So Nick's interests were not the same as other kids his age.
Yeah, that's for sure. You know, we had him in t-ball. We tried to get him involved in sports, and he just had no interest in it. He was in t-ball, and as you could probably imagine, when he was in the field, instead of catching balls or playing in the field, he was looking for airplanes, looking to see which was the next flight going over. We tried putting him in soccer, and you know, one day he came back and said, I want to quit. Tell me again why I'm chasing this ball in 90-degree heat when I have no interest in doing so. So, you know, it was tough because we were trying to introduce him to different things, but he had strong opinions on what he liked and didn't like, and he just was not somebody who was engaged in sports. He just didn't like it. Unfortunately, that is something that typically boys do. So when when you have a young boy who's not involved in sports, it takes some of the opportunities to make friends away. And you know, because usually they start with t-ball and they progress to the next level and to the next level. So that that lack of interest in sports and opportunity to socialize that way, in addition to having these strong passions, which kind of alienated him a little bit, that I think contributed to his feeling that he wasn't part of something bigger.
Were there ever concerns about him being bullied, or was it more that he just didn't have close friends?
Both, actually. There was never a strong concern for bullying, but that's not to say he wasn't bullied. He was never beat up. You know, there was nothing physical, but you know, kids can be cruel. They can be very unkind with their words. There was a couple of boys in grade school, a couple of boys in middle school, and even in high school. We had one boy who went from grade school to middle school to high school with him. Actually, senior year, right before graduation, came up to Nick and said, "Hey, man, I'm really sorry. I made your life miserable growing up, and I'm so sorry." And Nick held out his hand, shook it, and said, "I really appreciate you saying that. I appreciate it."
So that was an example of Nick's kindness there.
It was.
So when we come back, I'd like to hear about Nick's college age years. So join us when we come back from the break to hear more about Nick and Linda's experience. Welcome back to Mental Health First Aid. We've been talking with Linda Pacha. She's been telling us about her son, Nick. So tell us more about Nick, Linda.
Well, when he went to college, he was very disturbed about what he saw in college. He was a very righteous young man. And he would go to frat houses, just, you know, how freshman boys want to decide if they want to pledge or not. So he would go from one frat house to another, just kind of seeing what was out there. And he'd call home, and he was very disturbed, very upset about all the drinking, some of the drugs, some smoking pot. And he was worried about the young women that were going to some of the houses, because he would see some of the boys kind of plot what they were going to do, and that just really disturbed him. So college life, he wore his disappointments on his shoulders. He was much hopeful for it being a positive new experience, but some of the things he saw really took him down.
And so, what can you tell us about, you know, what happened after Nick's death? In
what
terms
way?
of how did you respond to that, and how did you react to that? What did you do about that?
Well, after you lose a child, it's probably, as like what they say, it's one of the most difficult things to do. I knew that I could take it one of two ways. I could let this absorb me and consume my life, or I can use what cards I was dealt with and use it for good. So after he died, right away, within the first couple of weeks, my husband and I decided that we were going to form Nick's Network of Hope. The name and the logo came to me, I believe, from above. It just popped in my head one day. I wasn't even thinking about it. And we decided to put a corporation together, not for profit. We didn't know what we wanted to do yet. We had to discern about it. I think that anytime you have a life tragedy like that, you shouldn't really do anything for a couple of years. I wanted to heal. I didn't want this to be about me. If I went up to speak or to talk to different groups, I didn't want to start crying. I didn't want it to be about me. I wanted it to be about the message. And my husband felt the same way. So we discerned about it. And then we were given a name of Scott Mitchell at Samarica in Naperville. And he was a resource person that I was told I could talk to once I was thinking about doing something more. So about a year and a half ago, I started talking with him and just banting around ideas. I talked to him about I wanted to write a book about Nick's life and the graces I was given to go forward to help people. I wanted to maybe put together a group where we can go into schools, into different high schools, either locally or, you know, go state by state with a psychologist, a parent, somebody who was depressed, had contemplated suicide but came out on the other side, so they can give witness to their experience. I thought that would be really effective to go and have assemblies and put on a program for kids. And then I also talked to them about a website. I thought it would be a great idea if we could have if maybe Scott and I can put together a website which would be an information portal where people can go in, and if they were going through anything, they could just click on the computer, turn it on, and have resources right at their fingertips. Well, Scott had a website of his own at Samarica, and he's a very busy man, you know, doing his administration of Samarica. So I thought, okay, it's up to me. You know, I've got to put a website together. I didn't even know, Denise, I didn't even know how to do a split screen at the time, but Scott gave me the name of a web designer, and I was going to sit down with him on a Friday, and Wednesday night I said, oh gosh, I don't even know what this is going to be about. I have no idea. Prayed about it, said, God, please give me some sign of what I'm supposed to talk about. Had done some research on different life challenges like anxiety, suicide, depression, eating disorders, and didn't know if I was going to include all that or if I should just focus on suicide, depression. that night, that was 2 days before I was meeting with the web designer, I had a dream, and I dreamt of one thing all night. I was shown a pair of hands, and it said, if you do suicide and depression, you get this. And it was a Kelly green, like upside down horseshoe. And it says, if you do all of them, and they stack different colors, if you do eating disorders, if you do LGBTQ, you get all this beautiful rainbow. And the hands went like this. I woke up, I said, that's it, that's what the website's supposed to be. It's supposed to be an information portal. It's supposed to give hope to people, and it's supposed to cover all the different life challenges. So that's what I did.
And it does. I after we met and I got your information at Send Silence Packing, I did, go look through the website, and it does have some wonderful information where people can click on other links to find additional information.
Thank you.
And that's so helpful for people, because they really do, often when people are struggling, it's because, that first piece is to have more information about what's going on and to be able to deliver that idea that, hope is available, and there are other people that want to be helpful to you.
Absolutely.
And here are some places where you can get that kind of help.
And if a parent goes on, often it's time is of the essence. They're worried about their child, and they want to get information quickly. So if you go on, there are hotline numbers. You can go right on and be pointed to exactly where to call and what to do.
Nice. So helpful. How long has Nick's Network of Hope been online or accessible?
I started last year right around 4th of July, and it went up at the very beginning of September.
Okay. All right. So going on like the first year kind of thing.
Yes, absolutely. And it's wonderful because now I'm getting information from people. They'll find out about Nick's Network, and they'll say, hey, this is a great resource about autism. Can you put this on? And so it's just something, it was a gift that keeps on giving. People then join in, and it becomes almost a community effort then.
Where people can contribute and share additional information.
Exactly.
So I'm wondering, Linda, if you could tell us, what did you do and what did your family do to kind of take care of yourself after Nick's death?
We relied on our faith. That was something that I think was the most integral part of our healing. And to be able to do good for others, to go out there and spread this message, was very healing for us also.
Okay. So Nick's Network of Hope was part of your healing process.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So when we come back, I'd really like to talk about, what parents can do, what things to pay attention to with their children, teens, college-age children, in terms of suicide prevention. So join us when we come back to talk, finish up our discussion about suicide prevention.
Their support changed my life.
They were like family.
My voice is now heard.
A home for every animal.
My future is bright because they cared.
This is our home now.
Thank you to the 1,200 nonprofits that serve Cass and Clay counties every day.
Welcome back to Mental Health First Aid. We've been talking with Linda Pacha about her son Nick and and his death. And Linda, you told us about what you did in response to the loss of Nick, of starting Nick's Network of Hope. But one of the things you mentioned is wanting to bring more awareness to the community about suicide and what parents and other people can do to help prevent suicide. So what do parents need to be aware of?
They need, if they don't hear anything else in this program, what they need to, as a takeaway here, is to look at their child's behavior versus what their child is telling them. They're often, not always, but often, their child will come and tell them something upbeat, to try to remain positive. Oh, Mom, I'm okay. Oh, Dad, I'm okay. No, it's not that bad. No, I don't need to go to the mental health center at school. It's okay.
Everything's fine.
Everything's fine. It's not that they're lying to their parents, because deep down inside, they really believe that. They want to believe that. They're trying their best to believe that. So it's almost like they're giving themselves their own pep talk. Plus, they are thinking that they're a burden on their parents. So the last thing they want to do is to tell their parents any more negative things, any more depressing things. Maybe they've already had some midnight calls, or calls home from college, or they've come home from school feeling upset. And so when they're talking with their parent, they're going to try to be then more upbeat. So look at their behavior. We know what the signs and symptoms are. I wish I would have known all of them when I was, when Nick was alive. They're on the internet, they're on our website, the changes and disturbances in sleep patterns, in eating habits, changes in moods. Look to see if your child is up on the computer, not just gaming, but doing research. If they aren't assimilating with other people, or even with the family. If you have to always call them down, hey, come on, get out of your room, get out of your room. Look at things like that. So look at their behaviors versus what they're telling. Another thing I would say to parents is that it could happen to anybody. You know, it's human nature when something bad happens. You like to distance yourself from that by saying, you know, that can happen to me because they did this, and we don't do that, so it's not going to happen. Or you can't tell me somewhere a parent was lowering that girl or that boy's self-esteem, or there wasn't drinking going on either by the kid or by the parents. I have spent the last couple of years, in addition to doing the website, but talking to parents who've lost kids and have lost spouses to suicide. And I'm here to tell you it happens in good families where everybody is trying their best. So don't think it just could happen to only, problemed families.
Right. And one of the things I so appreciate about you coming on the show, being at that Send Silence packing, and having your website is that your willingness, in spite of what I imagine sometimes must be very painful feelings, to be able to talk about that and to have the conversation, because I think so often we're afraid to talk about suicide, and we're afraid that if we do talk about it, we're going to make it okay, or we're going to put ideas in somebody's head. And really what I always like to say to people is, if you're concerned, ask the question, because sometimes someone needs you to ask that question of them, to create that space for them to really tell you how they're feeling.
If I can help any other families to not go through what we had to go through and what we will continue to go through every day for the rest of our lives, then it's worth it. Our whole family is committed to that.
So any other messages that, in terms of community awareness, that you think are important?
Yeah, the other thing I would like to say is that, it starts a lot in the schools. As we all have read in the newspaper lately, with the petition in one of our public high schools, there is just a lot of stress that is on our kids with homework. It's just not natural for kids to come home from school and have to do homework until the wee hours of the morning. There's no downtime. That coupled with social media, it's just, it's the perfect storm. These kids aren't able to release any of their stress for their day because they're always on. They're always on. Even when they go to bed, they have their phones on. So they really do need to look at what stress is going on the students. And I understand it's coming down a lot from the colleges because, you know, for example, in Illinois, our state is broke, so we have to, at our state school we have to get tuition dollars. They're trying to get more tuition dollars. They're going to international students. So there are fewer spots for in-state admissions. And so at the high school level, they're having to compete more to get to these positions. So it's a trickle down. It comes from the colleges, and then the high schools are just trying to get their students prepared to get those positions. And people in grade school, they're, you know, looking to see what the high schools are going to require. So then it goes to the parents, and the parents are trying to say, okay, we're trying to get them into the best honors program so that they are set in a position where then they'll be in honors in high school, and then they can be competitive for those positions in colleges.
So there's just all this stress without necessarily a lot of discussion about how do we cope with that and what are good coping strategies for that.
And the schools, they seem to cater to the top 15%, and the whole middle percentage of students who are never going to fit in that 15%, there's an incredible amount of stress there. And what about the students, so many students who don't want to go to college? They want to go to learn a trade or go to cosmetology school. If the schools are equating their success with their median ACT score and what percentage of their kids go to college, what implied message is that giving to the other students who maybe that's not their journey?
Yes, I think it's, you know, having conversations about what do we need to do as a broader community to think about all our kids and the different kinds of supports that kids need. So I was so impressed at the Send Silence Packing event how you were able to talk with other parents. So I really do want to thank you, Linda, for being on the show today, telling us about Nick and what you've done in response to losing him, and encourage people to get that information. And I want to say to anybody who might be having thoughts or feelings about suicide that there is hope and there is help. And if anyone needs help, they can contact the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, and that number is 800-273-8255. Please reach out and talk with someone because help and hope is available. Thank you for being with us on Mental Health First Aid, and until next time, be well.